Back at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center with Buckeye Talk, Nathan Baird from cleveland.com, along with Doug Lesmerises and Stephen Means. This is our first chance to talk to Jim Knowles since JT Tuimoloau's spectacular performance at Penn State. I was trying to come up with a fancier word than that, but I guess I'm not a very good writer because all I can give you is spectacular, but sort of a once-in-a-generation performance in a way. And Stephen, like it was interesting to hear him. You know, he made the point like, "Hey, I've been like slowly like climbing my way up the ranks over the course of my career. I don't get to have guys on my defense very often, ever, that are like this size." He said he's had some defensive ends that had this kind of athleticism, but not with the size that JT Tuimoloau has. And it was interesting to hear him kind of talk as if his eyes were fully opened, even though they'd seen it in practice. Now his eyes are sort of fully opened to the weapon that he now has at his disposal.
He even used the example of the first interception JT had where defensive ends go drop in coverage. Sometimes that's just part of defensive schemes. But they don't drop in coverage and then make a play on the ball, dive, and pick off and get an interception. That just does not happen ever. And you can't that's not something that Jim Knowles has really ever had to consider when he's putting together a scheme. Quite frankly, it's not something most defensive coordinators have to think about when they're putting together a scheme. So when you have that guy that has that extra thing that you maybe don't account for, whether it's an offensive coordinator putting together a game plan or a defensive coordinator when he's trying to build to his personnel, when he has it at his disposal, what does that mean? In the past, we've seen guys get simpler, and it's ended up coming to bite Ohio State in the butt. With a guy like Jim Knowles, who maybe is a little bit more of a schemer, what does that mean? What are we going to see JT do? Not necessarily against Northwestern or Indiana or even Maryland, but when we get to the Michigan game or when we get to a playoff game, when we get to these talent-equated games, how can he use a guy like that he's never had before?
Yeah, it was interesting. He was talking about most teams, defensive linemen will drop back, but it's like they're just there to cloud up things for a quarterback. They're there to just sort of fill a space. They're not really there to make a play. And now Ohio State has one of those guys, and it's a small group of guys that can make those sorts of plays, at least the way that he's describing it. And I asked him, hey, like we've been talking for so long about, you got this aggressive scheme, and you want to like come after the ball, and you've been slowly building it. But what does it mean now for you to have a guy who can go out and wreck a game like that? And we saw it the week before with Zach Harrison too. Like they've got multiple options now of guys who can be like sort of relentless and really thwart an opposing offense. And his point being, like you're saying, Stephen, like when you get guys who can now do things one-on-one, and you don't have to put extra emphasis, extra bodies at getting a job done, it opens you up to being able to do something else somewhere else. And it's sort of a domino effect. And, Doug, you've seen what the domino effect can be on Ohio State defenses when one of these guys, when the light goes on. And it seems like the light, hopefully, we'll see if it stays on. It sure went on in State College on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, we were, like, fascinated right when Jim Knowles got here. Like, what are you going to do with good players? Like, what is it going to mean, right? And is it, like, I was sort of curious, like, well, if you get too fancy with the good players, are you kind of going to mess them up? And like, Steven was saying, it's like, well, he's kind of like excited. Like now we can really do some stuff with the good players. On the College Football Survivor Show, which I would direct everyone to twice a week, the bonus episode that my partner Shahan and I did this week, we went through and we did month of November, the playoff race, picked the most important offensive player in the playoff race and the most important defensive player in the playoff race in the whole country. And I picked JT as the most important defensive player because it's that combination of we all, I think, believe the scheme is there defensively. Now add a game record to that, right? An unbelievable individual performer. And Tommy Eichenberg and Mike Hall and Ronnie Hickman have been great. But like, what does that mean for the next level of the Ohio State defense, especially against Michigan? It's fascinating to think about because, again, I think this is just the start.
I think that's a great way to phrase that, we've been saying all along that this incremental improvement for Ohio State's defense and the confidence they're building, that gets them to a certain level, but a player who can replicate the kind of performance he had on Saturday transforms things in another way. That's the College Football Survivor Show podcast, so get that wherever you can find podcasts, and get Buckeye Talk wherever you can find podcasts, and get our text, 614-350-3315, because today we're firing off everything Ryan Day, Jim Knowles, Brian Hartline are saying here from the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, and we'll be doing that all week from Buckeye Talk.